Greetings, you're listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. Guiding Stars is an interactive, soul-centered astrology talk show using the symbolic language of evolutionary astrology to enlighten and empower you on this journey. I'm here today with Simon Vorster from Sweden, discussing Saturn in Leo, or Saturn in the fifth house. We are moving through a series that we initiated in January, and here we find ourselves in May. And so for those of you who have this signature, you are going to learn so much more about your chart than you ever thought you could looking at this one planet. And Simon and I thought discussing Saturn was just very timely, considering there's so much energy in Capricorn at the moment. Pluto, Saturn in Capricorn, South Node in Capricorn, the North Nodes of all of our planets, of course. Not all, the outer planets, predominant amount of those in Capricorn ruled by Saturn. So we're all feeling the squeeze and we're all feeling the pressure. Maybe you're feeling like you're running out of time regarding something linked with your creative life purpose, which is so Leonian here. So this will be a great show. Perhaps you have transiting Saturn in your fifth house and you want to get a feel for that energy. So I'd like to welcome Simon back to Guiding Stars so we can discuss this. Welcome back.
Thanks very much, Kristin. Buzzing and super excited as always.
Ditto.
All
right. Anything you want to announce before we get started?
Yes, just to let everybody know that on my website, and I'll share the information at the end of this conversation, but on my website and also on my YouTube channel, which you just have to type in Raising Vibrations and my name, you'll see there is a video on Chiron, a 2-hour sort of presentation on Chiron, and also on my website there's an actual whole entire workshop of 4 videos that are roughly an hour long each that go through the different stages of what Chiron is about and how to interact with it. And really it's an attempt by me to give some practical tools to help you navigate through a Chiron experience. And so if you're somebody that is intrigued in learning about Chiron or wants to understand Chiron at a deeper level, or wants to just have this backpack of tools available to you when you transit through a Chiron experience, that is on my site, and you can go have a look at that whenever you have time. And there's some description on there as well in terms of what it goes into and what I do with it. So yeah.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for that. 2 hours on Chiron, also, of course, really a buzzword at the moment for people, with it being now in Aries.
Yes.
So do you discuss mostly about the Chiron in Aries, or are you looking at it in
Actually, what I did was I took it from this perspective where I started to observe that humanity is moving into a period of time where we are able to understand transformation at a more a deeper level, and that a lot of people are actually being able to experience transformational experiences. But we don't have very practical tools in how to psychologically move through a transformational experience. And so linking in the mythology of Chiron and what it represents, and what it is practically, and the psychological understanding of Chiron, I came at it from that angle. And that's why I actually call it tools that you can use to psychologically and emotionally use that period of your time as something that greatly benefits you. And so that's the intention. So not really focusing on Chiron and Aries as a transit per se, but incarnating the potential of what Chiron and Aries represents to us as a kind of global experience at the moment, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does very much. All right, excellent. All right, well, let's step onto the stage here with Saturn and Leo.
Right. Yes.
Very much an archetype for stepping onto the stage, and not everybody, obviously, with Saturn and Leo will be on stage, but certainly everybody with Saturn and Leo will feel like they came here with a special sense of destiny, and that they have something special to do. I feel like this Saturn sometimes can create a late blooming energy in Leo, but it can also be an energy that represents somebody that is going to become an authority and linked with their creative life purpose. And I know at least one of the examples today is right in alignment with that
Yeah, that's
description.
true.
Somebody who will make a name for themselves, be recognized for what it is that they bring here, what emanates from their being. So, where would you like to start? I like to also give a little bit of a foundation, of course, before we dive straight into Leo, like I just did. but just to give people, again, if they haven't listened to Aries up until this point, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, all those archetypes. If you have Saturn in the first or Aries, Saturn in the second or Taurus, Saturn in the third or Gemini, Saturn in the fourth or Cancer, we already have YouTube videos available for those, so you can listen to those if you've missed them. And let's just give people a little review on the archetype and why we are looking specifically at Saturn in the chart.
Okay. Yes. I mean, you're right. It's really essential to establish a structure in order to form an emotional connection to, and that's actually, in my opinion, not the evolutionary intentional purpose of Saturn itself, but it is the yeah, okay, so maybe it is maybe the purpose of it in some level, but as we as human beings psychologically interact with Saturn, Saturn is the boundary within our physical awareness, and it allows us to see ourselves, because just like in, I think it's the Neptune book that Jeffrey's talking about, Whispers of Eternity, in the beginning, he talks about consciousness as and it's, you can see this in water. Consciousness essentially is non-dual, okay, meaning that it's exactly that. It's not into, it's one. It's completely informed. So how does something that is in singularity know itself? And so through a natural kind of expansion, and this you can actually see in sacred geometry, boundaries form themselves, and within the contents of a boundary, consciousness can know itself because it sees or experiences the reflection of itself through the boundary, the container. And so that's how I perceive the human experience, understanding consciousness, because the human form, or the body itself, contains an aspect of consciousness. And then through the journey of time and space, we're able to actually perceive ourselves, and psychologically it becomes an emotional reflection. That's why the polarity point of Capricorn is Cancer. So Saturn, Capricorn, and the 10th house within the structure of the chart all represents this archetype, and it's the boundary. And we've spoken about it in previous conversations, and you've highlighted this really, really well. And I think it's an essential point to validate for anybody that's really learning this material when you're understanding Saturn at its framework, is that it conditions the chart as well. Because again, it is the nature of the physical life. And so everything that is contained within this life, it is ultimately going to have an influence. So, if you got Saturn in Leo, which is what our conversation is today, then you can see that all of the planets in your chart are going to have a subtle flavor of the Saturn and Leo representation. It's the structure of your psyche in that way. And so it upholds a sense of how we can emotionally identify ourselves, coming back to the consciousness experience itself in form. Another analogy that Jeffrey used to give was the form of the glass, and then water going into the glass. And so the form shapes the water in that sense. And so it's the same with Saturn. It shapes the contents of what it is having inside of it. And of course, consciousness, ourselves, and Saturn will provide that context in our lives.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking that made me think of, how it feels when you wear certain color clothes or certain kind of clothing, even on top of your own skin, which is Saturn, and the energy that it creates, or how you feel about it when you're wearing those colors in particular. So we can know that firsthand, and when we grab for something, right, depending on how we're feeling that day. And Saturn does connect to our skin and the bones that hold everything together. And it is the wrapping to our soul. So of course the energy of Saturn in your chart is going to influence how you feel, how you move, how you live. It's going to energize every other planet in your chart or condition it. It's just the same thing as, as I mentioned, it's the same thing as how it would in other shows that we've done, in understanding, in essence, how if a house is built with Saturn and Leo, right? The beams, the roof, the floor. This is your home that you live in. All this Leonian, sunshiny energy, fiery, passionate, creative energy. And you can imagine what kind of house that would be if it was built with the beams of the Leo energy. And then in each room will sit a planet in a different sign. And so that wrapping of Leo, that infusion of Leo into that energy of something else. We'll say somebody has a moon, a moon in Capricorn, to put a Leo base, ceiling, walls, wrapping around a moon in Capricorn. Wow, that is somebody, a very potentially ambitious soul who really has come here to very far-reaching energy, emotionally connected to what it is that they're doing, um, what it is that they want to build or create in their life. Very powerful combination right there. And I find it so interesting right now, the moon is in Capricorn actually at 18 degrees. It's conjunct the south node in Capricorn. It's conjunct Saturn. And there's a Leo rising, at least where I live. I don't know about you. So, I mean, you can't make this stuff up when we talk about these things.
No,
But, yeah.
it's true, eh?
And anyway, like I, for as long as I've been studying this energy, it's a planet I always take a look at in a reading, because it really does influence every other planet, conditions every other planet in your chart. So maybe somebody has no planets in Leo, none except for Saturn, and nothing in the fifth house. They are going to be so Leo. They're still going to have so much Leo in there. I mean, I've heard people say that. I don't understand how I have no planets in a fire sign, or no planets in the fifth house, but I feel so creative, so Leonian, I'm like, well, that's because this one planet means one heck of a lot,
Right.
it's that big, it's that influential. All
It's
right.
it's completely true, and I love the way that you condense that and put it into something that's super practical to understand, because that is another representation of Saturn, and it's important to understand that. It's important to know that the fact that Saturn does have, pardon me, a very strong influence in the nature of the chart, because as you pointed out, you can have no planets in the fifth house and just have, Saturn and Leo, and you can very clearly see that this person will have a Leonic sense about them, and
Uh-huh.
it's there, it's clear. Absolutely.
All right, so a few other things too about Saturn that I feel like are important. It connects to our limits. If you think about the chart from an astrological perspective, and I love how we've talked about this before, taking Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, the 10th house, then Uranus, ruler of Aquarius, 11th house, and then Neptune, the ruler of Pisces, in the 12th house.
Yeah.
Saturn is the limitation that we feel by being in the body. And there's even, a limitation in this context to know God, like, because our soul is held and bound by the container that it's in. We can have spiritual experiences in a meditation, but there's still a limit to what we can experience. Even Yogananda talks about this in his book. Until he has the Zen blow, and Yogeshwar wraps him on the chest and he flies out of the body for a while. But even as he was doing that, he still felt limited by that experience. We can't experience it all. But it's interesting, how Saturn's so connected to Uranus, or Uranus, and that border, that boundary between Earth and the astral plane, right?
Right.
And then how Uranus connects to Neptune, and how the soul is attempting to access the timelessness of things through that progression, right? Uranus wants to break down everything that's become crystallized and to remove anything that separates you from what you want and what you want to experience. And that 12th house obviously is seamless, timeless, boundless, no walls, no limitations. Your imagination, your dreams, heaven, the spirit world. And so just how those planets progress and how the wheel progresses, and knowing where your Saturn is, knowing how your container is energized, so you can understand how to liberate yourself from those limitations, where you go to do that. The Saturn placement is very important.
Yeah, completely. And if you go to the EA website, the School of Evolutionary Astrology website, I actually pulled out the typed out article. Not article, it's an actual lecture that Jeffrey Wolfe Green did, and it's Saturn and Neptune, and it's called the Divine Disconnect or something like that. It's not with me right now, but not the Divine Disconnect, but some divine something. Anyway, the point is that it's a Saturn Neptune article that you can actually go and find on the EA school website. I think you actually purchase it and it gets sent to you in the original, not in the original, but in the typed format. And it's just basically Jeffrey talking about the relationship between Saturn and Neptune, and essentially what the roles they play, and how those roles within the chart speak to what you've just shared right now. And I think that it's a really interesting read, to be honest, simply because of the fact that it brings into context and into focus not only the purpose of the soul's work, but it can also actually expand and open your perceptions of how Saturn and Neptune have a very important role to play with each other in terms of leading a quote unquote spiritual life, or an awakening life. And today, in today's conversation, I want to draw parallels between the importance of, not the importance, but the connection between Saturn, Leo, and Pisces. And I'll use that in the natal chart because it's what I've observed, and ironically, one of the charts today doesn't have it. So, there goes my 100%, categorization of this. But in almost, in this case, 99% of the time, when you see Saturn in the fifth house, or you see a fifth house energy, there's always going to be a Saturn component to the chart very strongly. And I have my theories around it, which again I'll share with a bit later as we kind of get into this. But there's a real thing there between the dynamic of Neptune, Pisces, 12th house, and what is sort of coming from the ether, and how that correlates to integration with Saturn. So Saturn is very, very much about the process of true spirituality or true awakening. And again, as Jeffrey talks about, for most of sort of masculine spiritual processes, it's been to try and get out the body. And so transcendence Neptune has been something where, again, we try to go outside the body, whereas really it's actually about going out into the ether and then bringing the knowledge back into the self. So it's a Saturn to Neptune, Neptune to Saturn component. And this is, again, ultimately one of the reasons as to why these two planetary archetypes are very important to a process of soul awakening experiences. And this is containing the container, right?
Yeah, so he talks about that we're all limited by this container, and so our own experience of knowing God will be different than somebody else's,
Correct.
because of the container and how our consciousness is structured, right? And I did find this little blurb from page 142 in the autobiography of a yogi when Yukastar gives Yogananda this experience to know the divine firsthand. And some of his response to what happened was he called it an oceanic joy that broke upon calm, endless shores of my soul. The spirit of my God I realized is exhaustless bliss. His body is countless tissues of light. A swelling glory within me began to envelop towns, continents, the earth, solar and stellar systems, tenuous nebulae, and floating universes. Suddenly the breath returned to my lungs, Uranus, with a disappointment almost unbearable. I realized that my infinite immensity was lost. Once more, I was limited to the humiliating cage of the body. And so, sure, the wise sages and gurus of our time can know elements of God, but, what can one man or woman ever truly know about the totality of creation? And so therein lies your limitation, our limitation, Saturn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I love that chapter. It's called Experience in Cosmic Consciousness in that book, autobiography. All right. And so we are always also looking to the polarity of our Saturn position. Saturn in Leo's polarity would be the 11th house or Aquarius, which is that midpoint between Saturn and Neptune.
That's right.
The liberation of the Saturn and Leo. And of course, with Saturn and Leo, if their heart's not in something, forget it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be a big part of a big piece of how that plays out, and a necessary piece. All right, I've kind of jumped ahead into Leo land again, but
well,
anything more you want to say? We can also just
exactly, just like with Saturn, it speaks to the process of psychological process of growing up, and one of the things that I think is really important with understanding Saturn work in your life is that this is where you're going to find yourself meeting the limitations of your emotional development, and through taking on a sense of discipline and interfacing with experiences that confront you to observe your limitations, will you find the process or the chance or the opportunity to experience taking a constructive attitude that allows you to interact with something in a slow, progressive process that then will eventually lead you to a path of becoming a healthy authoritarian in whatever line or commitment you have chosen to go in. So in very sort of more summarized words, Saturn in your chart will ask you to commit to something and trade your time for experience, and then through that become wisdom, that then becomes something that will be perceived as somebody that has an authority there. So it really, really encourages you to commit to something, and at the same time, through the commitment, go through a process of maturation. And again, I'm going to highlight to us using the natural zodiac how that actually works. And this is, again, what is actually at the root core of your Saturn return when you get to the age of 28.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, it's so true. And when I think of Leo, I do think of the chart of the child. They don't ever really want to grow up. So
well,
Saturn return.
It's completely true. And so here's a really, really cool example, right? So Peter Pan. I've been, and I'm really excited. So you're going to feel it off me today, but I've been recently exploring the context of purpose and destiny, okay, and what that actually means or represents itself within the context of a human experience. Like, how does one truly experience meaning and purpose, and then destiny as a path of maturation? So I've been like, oh, wow, this is fascinating. What am I exploring here? And so two things came into my field. One was the process of the Lion King, which is, if I want to
Yeah.
accentuate Saturn in the fifth house, this is a Saturn in the fifth house experience. Okay. So you've got the Lion King, and you also have Peter Pan. And I think that both of these sort of stories speak to the different paths that somebody can walk with Saturn in the fifth house or Saturn in Leo. Okay. So, yeah, you have, everybody knows the story of Simba, in the sense that his dad, sort of says to him, this is the kingdom in this way, very Saturn and Leo, the kind of authoritarian, the legacy Saturn. And this is our kingdom, and we rule over this kingdom in a way that is in perfect harmony and balance with everything interconnected. And so there's this beautiful expression of Aquarius here, that it's not about the underdeveloped aspect of Leo, which is the necessity. So this is really important. As you go through your Saturn work, you will do this. I've seen it, and it's not something that is a negative trait. It's just an evolutionary phase that must be overcome to access the gifts of Aquarius. Otherwise, it becomes isolating. Aquarius, the shadow of Aquarius, meaning isolation. And so it is where you are in a place where you can't validate your own self, and so therefore you become somebody that attracts attention in order to have the validation or the attention on you, and that can lead to almost a sense of it's a sense of narcissism, right? The need for grandiose behavior in order to attract attention through manipulative ways. Now, Simba's dad in this case is reflecting to him that we are the kings of this, but we are not ruling from a totalitarian, tyrannical place, which is what his brother represents, Scar, the shadow aspect of Saturn, which is the one that wants the power to influence purpose in life, but the power is rooted in a subjective narcissism of, why did I not get this? Or, that underdeveloped, resentful inability to access the higher aspects of the fifth house, right? So in the story as it unfolds, as we know, Simba sort of loses his dad and he blames himself, and so he goes into isolation. And this was really, really profound, super much. And I can't wait to put together the the workshop / presentation on how to understand these deep spiritual truths that are held within the purpose of finding one's destiny, even if you don't have Pluto as, Saturn in the fifth house. And that is that. So you go into this exile, and he goes into, he gets met with Timon and Pumbaa, as we know, and they uphold this philosophy that is Hakuna Matata, which simply means no worries, no responsibility, ultimately. And this is really, really interesting, because, again, when you actually step into purpose and destiny in your life, okay, you actually assert a connection to responsibility, which leads you to then a period of time in which you grow up and you let go of your immaturity and your subjective perceptions of yourself, and you objectify and you grow and so on and so forth, which we'll get to. And so he lets go of the responsibility. Now, this is profound. In his growing up phase, and because he hangs out with these people, what he's actually saying is, I want to live a life where I don't take responsibility, but because I have no responsibility, there are no obligations. Because I have no obligations, then I can just hang around and be free. But he doesn't grow, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is the story of Saturn, is that we can choose to not pick up Saturn's request, but in that state, we will remain in a state of disempowerment, but we will also not know obligation, and we will be free in that sense, but we will never become anything. Okay. Anyway, Saturn, he gets met with Nala and all of this, and the baboon comes to speak to him, and this was really profound. The actual process of the baboon in his process of Simba, coming to realize that he needs to come back to this Pride Rock, is actually his inner shaman. And when you watch that phase, that period of interacting between, I think his name is Rafiki and Simba, you will see that this baboon is the inner shaman, that when we are called to take on the hero's journey, which is that initiation process, we realize within ourselves that there is a necessity for transcendence. Okay, super, super deep, but so profound to the leader, Pluto, the Saturn in the fifth house complex. And this transcendence is the realization of your immaturity and your limitations and your subjective, internalized, childlike self. This is the Saturn return. This is what you'll probably go through with your Saturn in the fifth house or Saturn in Leo. And what happens with him is he looks into the water and he sees himself, but he sees a little bit of his dad. And what he gets reminded of is his guilt. And when he begins to look deeper beyond the reflection, but into the water, and then in a sense also up at the sky, he has a transcendental mystical experience, which means he awakens his inner father's message to him was that you have a fate and destiny. Okay. And in this sense, when he comes to understand this, he realizes this question that had essentially been keeping him stuck, right? And I know that this is a long elaborated thing, but I hope that you'll see value in this. And this was that he couldn't identify which person he was. He lost his identity, another Saturn kind of thing. This is something that's really important for all of our Saturn work, is that we have to re-identify ourselves. It's a very profound aspect or transition or period in our Saturn return. We don't know how to identify ourselves because there's one identity that is old and there's the other one that's kind of pushing us to go beyond what we know and to commit to something. And what's really fascinating is he remembers the conversation with himself and his dad, and he talks about the stars holding the kings of the past, and they are there because their destiny, in a sense, aligns with the kings of the past, right? The destiny is, and the stars are the representation of purpose, the representation of aligning to your North Star, Saturn. This is the MC of your chart. And so with Saturn in the fifth house, it's coming into realization of what your North Star is. And so in that sense, you will understand the values that you align with that will actually then awaken your purpose and destiny in its truest sense. And that's when you can commit. And look at these archetypes. Taurus, fixed cross, squares the Leo aspect, fixed cross, right? Fixed sign. Scorpio opposes Taurus, also squares Leo. And what you have here is that when you have an awakening experience, this is the conversation that we talked about with Uranus being the middle point between Pisces and Saturn or Capricorn, is that when we illuminate or awaken, then we transcend. And when we transcend, we are able to transform. And in this state, we come into contact with the deeper self. And the deeper self then reveals the purpose. And in that state, we get guided by the mystical experiences of the history of the past. So he looks up at the stars and he sees his dad, but what he really sees is the values held in him. And so he would have never gone into exile, and he would have never sort of neglected his fate or destiny if he completely rejected the values of his dad. Then he would have just said, yeah, that's right. I want to live as a Kuna Matata life. But when he realized that his destiny was to come back to the pride and to take down and slay the shadow. And this is something that's so crucial with all of our Saturn work, but particularly Saturn in the fifth house, is that we have to, before we get to the purpose of our existence, we must slay the internalized authority figure that we internalized growing up. And in this case, it represented that. And so this is where the Pan story comes in. Pan doesn't want to grow up. Never Neverland is the realization of never growing up, because what he sees is Captain Hook. And Captain Hook is the manifestation of an adult self that, firstly, in his state is, he's tyrannical. And so if you don't actually have Saturn in the fifth house, a parental figure that represents a healthy responsibility or a structure of what it means to take on commitments in a structured way, well, then you don't want to grow up, right? And so in a sense, we never really turn to Saturn and say, oh, I embark on your journey and your request, because what I've seen in terms of what that looks like is just very oppressive. So why would I want to do that? So, and you can even look at Captain Hook as a symbolism of he's eaten. He has his hook, which is the manifestation of the crocodile, and the crocodile is the realization of time. And that's another thing with Saturn. And I know this because I have Saturn conjunct my Sun and my Mercury and my Pluto in the 10th house. I know this phase where you don't want to give up your childhood or your innocence, because what you give up is, as in a sense, time. And time in itself is always going to come for you. So whether you choose to wake up at the age of 40, which is going to be even more difficult, and you delay your Saturn work, at some point you're going to realize that giving up your time is actually replacing it with something more profound, which is the maturation process of wisdom. And so you have to first come to understand that. And so Captain Hook represents this kind of process of the relationship between adolescence and maturity. And so you have to really go into the contours of what Saturn represents in a shadow form, and then slay that, like really, really break that structure down. And then you will find the true form to Saturn. So I'm going to leave that at that, because I feel like I've overwhelmed a lot of people, but it's just such a beautiful way to really capture the essence of the fifth house, and or at least Saturn in the fifth house as well. It's really prolific. So many people with energy in their chart have got Leo archetypes, and every single one of them go, I want purpose and success, but I grapple between oppressing myself and feeling lazy because,
right. Oh, well, I think those were wonderful examples, because when I think of Leo, I do think of things like The Lion King, and I realize that film and getting lost or escaping in movies and even animation are very Neptunian kinds of things, but Leo is a lot about, the creative process and being on stage in some way. So I loved your analogies. They're wonderful, and everybody could relate, through those characters. So that was a great way to set this up for looking at some specific examples, if you think that's a good next place to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to use this briefly. He has Capricorn in the natural zodiac, and he has the fifth house. And so there's a natural inconjunct between the fifth house and 10th house. And this inconjunct, which is a 150-degree angle, it's a blind spot. So in a sense, Leo doesn't see Capricorn and Capricorn doesn't see Leo, but what they represent is that, as a child, you are limited by the limitations of the structures. And so you have fantasy, but then when you want to integrate your childlikeness into a structure that holds meaning for you, and that's where the other inconjunct sits, you have to go through the process of Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, and Sag. And this transformational experience is first a humiliation process, and it doesn't have to be negative. It's more like a coming to terms with a necessity for growing up. So it's okay, there's things that I need to learn, Virgo. And then how do I interface and learn to interact with other people and, learn social skills? And then as I do that, how do I transform through understanding intimacy? How do I recognize my limitations and then grow past them through confronting the necessity for slaying the dragon, as it were? And then from there, I expand my horizons. And then from that space, I become an authoritarian in my own sovereignty. And this is actually something that is very, 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 very important to realizing a process of purpose in your life. And this isn't something that's really big with Saturn and Leo, is that people can say, and Jeffrey has said this, and we'll actually go into his chart, ironically, Saturn and Leo will give themselves the space to be as this is my purpose, this is my destiny, this is who I am, I'm going to validate it. And that's great. And I believe that 100%. But if there is an aspect of that Saturn in Leo that hasn't gone through this transformational process, it becomes highly, highly narcissistic. And again, not in a psychopathic way, but more along the lines of, you will never get to see how life is also teaching you something. And that's what he says, with the Pisces in conjuncting the Leos, that at some point there can be something that will knock you off your high horse. And that's not a nice thing to experience, So I hope that kind of gives some insight into the actual work that is necessary for not only Saturn, but Saturn in the 5th house as well.
There's definitely, I like how you use that blind spot too in this maturation process that's necessary as you come through those archetypes. That was really beautifully said. And my favorite thing that you shared about Saturn, I don't think you've said this before, and if you did, I've forgotten, but calling it your North Star. It's the highest point in your chart.
Right.
And for Saturn anywhere, for all of you, all of us, it's a good thing to meditate. Like, what is an evolved version of your Saturn in whatever sign look like? It is your North Star in terms of, you think about climbing a mountain, right? Saturn, your ambitions, the things that you want to do and experience in order to grow. The mountain you would like to summit in order to say, yes, I have arrived, or I've done what I've come here to do, or I'm on my way. Your North Star is such a beautiful way to describe Saturn.
Yeah, precisely.
It gives it space. It gives it that sextile to Pisces. It gives you that space and the freedom to experience or express this archetype in your life. So instead of feeling bound by it or limited by it, Saturn will create the structure for you to rise to new heights, to remove the ceiling through the sextile to Pisces. So thank you for that. It was excellent.
Yeah, and just one thing to kind of really illuminate, like really, really drive that home. That's why it's the Peter Pan complex, because Peter Pan is Lost Boys. He's leading the Lost Boys. He's in Never Never Land. And when you don't have your North Star, I mean, what star does he go to when he goes to Never Never Land, right? He's first looking at the stars. So it's something about aim, something about direction. Look at a ship, for instance. Look at the nature of the wheel. It's a captain of your own ship. These are real things in our reality that are, the expressions of these archetypes. And when you're at the ocean, or when you're in a place of complete Neptunian states, right? The ocean, it's navigation, it's the nauticals, Capricorn, and it connects to that. And so when you have the North Star, or you're guided by the stars, this is the reason why it's destiny with the 5th house, because when you're guided by the stars, which is the realization of mystical experiences, then your direction is purposeful and you find meaning in it. But if it's not, then you don't have destiny, because destiny, there is no direction to integrate your experiences into, and you're just lost at sea. And so when you're not having that direction, you can't integrate your Uranian insights into the collective that awakens people into, like Prometheus, it gives fire to the people. It's very profound. And let's actually go on to the chart of somebody that has literally done that. Here's the great example of this. This is Jeffrey Wolfe Green's chart, and there you have Saturn conjunct Pluto in the 9th house in Leo. And what are we using today as this is the point I was trying to make, was that when Simba, when his dad tells Simba right in the beginning that the kings of the past are in the stars, he's referring to the incarnation of consciousness in a state of transcendence. It's like it's true immortality, because it's transcended the limitations, which is the purpose, which is what Yogananda experiences when he comes into the body. He realizes, coming back into his breath, that he's in this little small limitation. And that's the whole reason as to why people want to transcend it, because they don't want the limitation. And I think at some level, purpose and fate and destiny as a human race is to understand immortality. And so when it comes to Jeffrey Wolfe Green's work, you can see here that he had to resolve his skip steps in his charts, the moon square the nodes. He knows that. He shared it in his videos. You can see it. But here he has Saturn in the ninth house, and we're talking about a body of knowledge, Saturn, in the ninth house, that he presented and brought through and he's recognized for. And it has transcended his limitations because we are embodying the nature of his awareness through the quotes, through the things that he said, and the fact that we're actually carrying the work on him in a timeless fashion. And, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's to me what I see.
Oh, yeah, that was a wonderful description of all of that. And it's important to note, too, that if you've got a Saturn that's retrograde, you are not going to be conforming to a traditional way of going about your creative process. And I mean, I have never met anybody who's rebelled more, in life. And one thing he used to share is that, most souls steer away from their thumbprint. They move away from it in order for survival or fear of judgment. And very few souls will never allow themselves to be conditioned. And that is his soul. Never allowed himself to be conditioned. Pluto, Saturn retrograde, balsamic in the ninth in Leo, maintaining his nature no matter what.
Right.
And you can see the violent exits in the past, right? Uranus opposing Mars on the south node, all this sudden death through defending tribe, defending people, willing to die for what he believed in. Never, Uranus is retrograde too. Venus is retrograde. So
yeah,
it was very inspiring, to be in those schools and to, hear of his stories and to really, I can tell you that I don't think I've ever met another person in my life who has never allowed themselves to be conditioned. And there are consequences with that. Yes, you will be evolving at a very fast rate, but it's going to be a very Plutonian path because people project upon those souls, judge them. And, he's such a natural teacher as well in this context, of course, to put it in the ninth house. Helping to remind people to recover their nature, to recover this whole teaching too around the truth, and it does not require belief, and that the body doesn't lie, that we can feel the truth, in our blood and our bones when we hear it, when we see it, we interface with it. Really encouraging people to unwrap those layers and to express the heart of their God potential. And so he really empowered women as well because of women being such this underdog race in a sense, and the imbalance of gender and wanting to help women in particular. I mean, men, of course, plenty of men came to him for guidance and help, but just as I would say Jesus did in terms of Mary Magdalene being his right hand woman, right?
Yeah.
He was very much the same way with the teaching that we are all equal. God created all of us equal, male, female, whatever gender, rich, poor. And so like Christ, Jesus, and Jeffrey had the same kind of desire to help empower anyone who felt different or not enough, or again coming in as the underdog, or someone living on the outskirts, or not feeling like they fit in. And so remember that if you have a Saturn retrograde, it's going to operate very differently than a Saturn direct in Leo in particular.
Well, something that I wanted to point out that I think was really interesting about your, speaking is that, in EA, when you look at Saturn retrograde, you've got to bear in mind that the next planet to look at is actually Uranus. And just looking at repeating themes here, right? So you've got Uranus in the 8th house, and yeah, Uranus is retrograde. So technically, we're going to look to Neptune in the 11th here. But just for a moment, here you have this Uranus in the 8th house, and it's influencing the Saturn retrograde. Saturn is in the 9th house, and so yeah, you have another repeating theme of Jupiter in Scorpio. So Jupiter or Saturn conjunct Pluto 9th house, Pluto Scorpio, same archetype. Jupiter in Scorpio, again, the same archetypal structure. And yeah, you have the planet that's also influencing Saturn there, also in the 8th house. So you got a lot of Scorpio stuff here, right? Transformation, yeah. We're talking about that. You can see that the planetary ruler of his Neptune is Venus, which is in Scorpio. And again, we're going back to the repeating theme of Pluto, 9th house. So that's just that. And then look at this over here. Look at how much stuff's in Sag, right? Jupiter is ruling his south node. It's ruling his sun. It's ruling his Mars. And to me, what I find really fascinating about his chart is that he clearly came into this life, and I know this because he actually said this during his 2005 talk at the conference, the Jeffrey Wolfe Green conference, where he was told to do astrology, and he was like, why would I want to do astrology? And then, right, he began dreaming in Sanskrit. He got this mission that was given to him, and he was like, why do I need to do this? And that was one thing that, you know, radically transformed the nature of, and this is how I see his retrogrades as well, is he didn't need to, but he was almost pushed to restructure the framework of belief. Not only is in experiences in Vietnam and perceiving things directly, Saturn, of the horrors that existed there, and this is another deep Scorpio theme, again with Chiron in the 9th house there, the 12th house. It's like he watched somebody die in a place that was, or in a state that was in deep religious kind of philosophical inquiry, you know, like praying to some existential being. And, you know, that I'm sure probably affected him quite a lot. And that really reshaped his Venus retrograde there. He had to relook at the values of cultural beliefs.
I need to stop you right there. Yeah. It is so, because what happened was his buddy was reading the Bible.
Right. Exactly.
And got hit by a rocket round or something, and he's right next to him, and this Bible just blew up, right? You know, it could have been him. But that Mars in Sag opposing Uranus and Gemini there. I mean, right. Not that I feel like he had, and I'm sure he had no patriarchal idea of God, but still, when you are in a human form and your idea of God and you know, the power of that energy, and then to have this soul, you know, doing what, you know, a God person, where he was trying to do, at least have that. I mean, it was just, yes, I'm going to take a hard look at what it is that I believe.
Exactly. I mean, that is such a beautiful, I mean, it's not a beautiful way, but it is definitely something that just, you know, confronts you at the most core. And, you know, I think that here you have this Uranus oppose the south node Mars, and you're squaring the moon over here, and you know he's dealing with some complex post-traumatic stress with that, and that obviously on some level initiates him into a process of seeing evolutionary astrology as a way to find meaning in such intense experiences. And this is a very strong 9th house Sagittarius type of process of meaning in this suffering. That's one thing. And then of course his other thing was that you know he's going to just kind of be a Buddhist and meditate and all that, and then you know coming into contact with him needing to recover the moon square the nodes through family, and you know integrating into that. And he says that in his 2005 conversation, where you know family was something that obviously on some level brought him into an experience of experiencing God in a different way and recovering that. And now you have a whole entire tribe or family of people that do evolutionary astrology because of that moment in his life. And so I really, really, in my view, see that this person's fate or destiny, you know, was so deeply entwined with the reconstruction of faith from a place that had intense experiences that you can see that the legacy of it is now truly in the fabric of our own awareness. We're not talking about this person just in a, I know this is this chart. We're actually living the archetypal expression of that choice when we talk about EA, and we bring it to life over there, and we have a website that's all there, talk about Saturn and Leo. I mean, if that's not what it is, then I don't know.
Right. EA is amazing, and the detail and the levels and the layers of which you can express and unveil things is so powerful. And
Right.
so, yeah, those were excellent examples, not just his own family, but his spiritual family.
Yes.
And so powerful too about this work and what we teach is that you can't evolve through the mind, right? You can only evolve through the emotional door, which was a door he had been avoiding in recent lives. You know, a lot of monks or spiritual people want to kind of bypass that. But this moon square the nodes will, in Pisces, in the fourth house, will force you into your emotional body at every turn. As EA, we teach that you must come through that door, through that house, in order to evolve. So Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, this water trinity. And so here he also is reminding people through the work, not only in his own life, is he forced to experience, the totality of how something feels. To put Moon and Pisces in the fourth house is the most sensitive combination you could possibly, put for the moon, and trining Venus and Scorpio, trining the ascendant, trining Jupiter. It just doesn't get more sensitive than that. And so the combination between sensitivity and intensity is unparalleled.
Right. Yeah, you can see that. I
Feels
mean, that was
the kindness, yeah, the kindness and even the innocence, the natural innocence that still exists, even with everything that he has experienced. And he used to call himself an emotional chump all the time, because you just give somebody just gives or asks for one more chance, or he has this hope that maybe this time they'll come through or pull through. And so that's how he used to refer to himself, because he wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt, or he could see the spirit of their potential or the good and the God in somebody. But then that, of course, led to plenty of disillusionment along the way. But
yeah.
all emotional experiences, of course, that he had to experience in order to recover that skip step.
Yep.
All right. Do you have another chart? Do you want to talk more about this one?
Yeah, I have another chart actually, and it's a Pluto in Sagittarius soul, but literally Pluto in Sagittarius as well. um, and here you have, again, this interesting dynamic of the Sun conjunct the Saturn in the fifth house and then in Leo. And again, look here, Jeffrey Wolfe Green, Saturn in Leo, Jupiter in Scorpio. Yeah, you have another Capricorn signature that's very prevalent, Sun conjunct the Leo. So not only do you have the Sun in its own house, the Sun in its own sign, but you have Saturn in the fifth, Saturn in Leo, and then Saturn conjunct the Sun. That's all of the archetypes in one place.
Wow. Oh, amazing.
Yeah, so I find this a really interesting chart in that sense, just simply because, yeah, you get another Neptune in the 11th dynamic. And I've seen this type of signature quite often where, again, it's not 100% true, but most of the time observed with Neptune in the 11th house dynamic, or Saturn conjunct the Sun, or Saturn in Leo, that there's this Neptune 11th dynamic. And again, meaning through individuation, because Leo is very much about this process of individuation dynamic over there. Is there anything that you see in this chart that you find interesting to reference? I mean, Pluto square the nodes.
This is somebody that you know, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely. This is, you've got this South Node in Virgo with Mars in Virgo. This is not your typical Leo. I mean, there's a lot of humility here.
Mm.
The soul's been through a lot of experiences in the past where, potential betrayals in relationship, over trusting the wrong people,
Mm.
Of course, that Pisces rising, there's going to be that natural innocence. And the ruler of Pluto and Sag is Neptune in Aquarius retrograde squaring Jupiter, which again is just misapplied trust. And so a life of recovering their power, empowering themselves, trusting in themselves in terms of when they have a feeling or a hit about something or someone, to trust that. And also I would say too that this is someone who's been persecuted for sure for who they are, for their work, natural work and way in the world. And so an opportunity to, again, re-empower themselves, heal the past, kind of blaze their own trails with that North Node in Pisces in the first house.
Right.
And I do love that Mars in Virgo trining a 10th house moon, because, you know, this soul is going to be very determined to do whatever necessary. And, you know, I don't know the stage of evolution of this soul, but I would say that, you know, in an evolved context, this is absolutely somebody that would have a large capacity to help others, to teach others, to reach others, you know, in some creative Uranian alternative way, like coming in through the side door. Pluto retrograde, Uranus retrograde, Neptune retrograde, they are not going to want, they're not going to be conforming in the way that they go about their message. You know, a natural teacher, of course.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the interesting things about this person is that the kind of role models that they have in their life, all of them actually are, they work for themselves. And so they actually grow up in this environment where, you know, following your fate or your destiny is something that you can actually do. And
I love that.
it's just really interesting how I see the Sun, Saturn, all of that stuff in the fifth house. It's like, my question is, why did the soul choose that? What was so necessary to have such a profound level of Leo energy to be brought to the surface? And I, you know, one of the things that really speaks to me quite a lot is the square, you know, to Jupiter, the T square between Neptune, Jupiter, and Leo, Saturn, Sun contact. And one of the things that really pops up quite a lot, and I found a really interesting correlation between this chart and Jeffrey Wolfe Green's, is that, you know, there's religious context involved, and
definitely.
right, and you can see it with that Pisces energy, the Virgo energy, and this religious context of the idea of God, and that within the work of you know, Jeffrey coming to a deep realization of what Christ represented to him in his life, and how this person will actually, in a sense, grapple between the purpose and meaning of life, because, you know, they're part of the Pluto and Sagittarius generation, and this is another project that I'm doing as well at the moment, which is looking at the correlation between the Pluto and Virgo generation, the Pluto and Sagittarius generation, and the relationship between how those two generations have had to experience a complete annihilation of faith that then led to a re-establishment of purpose and meaning in a way that was outside religious context. And the way that that materialized was a collapse of an existential ideology and the recollection of purpose and meaning coming from inside, and reconnecting with the idea of God as something that is in existence in everything. So that comes through like the process of things like nihilism and atheism, and the necessity of what that actually represents in terms of denying authority. And another thing that's really profound here with the Pluto and Sagittarius that have a deep connection to the Pluto and Virgos is that during between 2000 and 2008, the Bush administration was pushing the need to go into Iraq, Iran because of weapons of mass destruction. And one of the highly influential aspects of getting the nation on board was the religious context. And so we clearly came to realize that this was an agenda that was being influenced into the collective based on chaos. And that chaos itself is a representation of what it means to confront the deepest aspects of our human nature, where, in a sense, this is very, very deep here, but confront the deepest aspects of our human nature and come to terms with what that means to be human on this little planet. And so a lot of the time we manifest meaning to give us an ability to digest the vastness of what that represents, that chaos. And so religion in itself, in some sense, was used as a way to actually control the masses. And so with the 2000s, this was something that was really evident, and I think was being brought to the context when the Pluto and Sagittarius were coming onto the planet during the time, because it is their karma, and they're wrestling with that with your Neptune and Aquarius. And I looked at Nietzsche's work, and it's just fascinating. Nietzsche has has Neptune at the later degrees. I think he's at 26 degrees, 24 degrees, pardon me, Aquarius, and his Jupiter lands at 26 degrees Pisces. And one of the things that was really profound about him was the conclusion he came to in abandoning the church because of the loss of his father, and how he sort of grappled with this idea. And then you look at the Pluto and Sagittarius, and sorry for going on a rant over here, it just came out, but it's deeply fascinating to me when you see this chart, that there's the need to recover the loss of faith. And I see this Leo energy in this chart over here as a point of the generation, because a lot of people born in 2006 will come into this contact because they'll have those symbols, and they've got the nodes in Pisces and Virgo, and we all know what that is. So coming into context of realigning purpose and meaning as a process of spirituality, Neptune and Saturn. That was that article, that lecture that Jeffrey did. It's on the EA school. So anybody that's listening to this, go check it out. You can buy it. I think it's like $4 or something, or $8, and it gets sent to you. Divine Disconnect, something like that. And it speaks to that, the importance of coming into deep spiritual understanding that is not associated with an outer authority, and so therefore there can't be a complete rulership of one's purpose and meaning through an authoritarian process. And I think that a lot of the Pluto and Sagittarius generation have come into this lifetime to actually work through some of that religious prior lifetimes of mass killings and fanatical Christianity and Judeo-Christian dogma that really, that's that Uranus and Pisces, man. It's like it's just so much.
It's like the Crusades, the Christian Crusades, the time period is this, there's so much, or falling for false teachings, false teachers, realizing that they're not who they say they are, and all the disillusionment that comes with that. Just then what happens if what I have allowed myself to believe my whole life isn't true?
Yes, and that's that Saturn conjunct Leo. So it's like, can I validate that for myself, and how do I do that?
Right. Yes.
Mm.
All right, that was great. But this soul does have Uranus and Pisces retrograde trining Jupiter and Scorpio. They will find the truth for themselves.
Right.
All right, that was really a wonderful show, Simon. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anybody interested in learning more about evolutionary astrology or getting a hold of the original teachings, those are available through DVD on the School of Evolutionary Astrology website, schoolofelvolutionaryastrology.com. And we will be back next month with Simon discussing Saturn in Virgo, or Saturn in the 6th house. And we'll be meeting with Rose tomorrow. And we're doing a transit show for June that will be available through the Healthy Life Network. So reach out if you don't know how to get a hold of that, but that's in my newsletter, and we'll be letting you know about the transits coming up. So thank you so much, Simon. That was a wonderful hour. More on Saturn next month.
Cool.
Until next time. Namaste.